Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. Wave 2 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass has finally been released. I can't really quite describe how much I've been waiting for this to come out, and most likely you guys have been eagerly waiting as well. The first wave was released all the way back in March, and it had been nearly 5 months before Nintendo finally announced that Wave 2 was coming. And I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised. I knew it would most likely triumph Wave 1, but I didn't realize by just how much of an extent. I've been having way more fun with this one than I ever had with the first one so far, and it keeps me hopeful for the next few waves. But in the meantime, let's rank every single Wave 2 course. I mean, I could also do a combined ranking of all DLC tracks released so far if you guys want, but let's tackle one thing at a time. With that being said, let's get started. First off, before we talk about number 8, let me make this clear. I did not expect it, but by some miracle, I enjoyed every single course in Wave 2. Unlike the first wave, which had a few misses here and there, I've loved playing on all of them here. And that's saying something, because in last place on this ranking, we have SNES Mario Circuit 3. Yes, I can't believe I actually enjoyed this course. I knew no doubt that it would be last on the list, but I didn't think I'd still find it compelling. We all knew a SNES Mario Circuit would come into this DLC sooner or later, but the question was which one? Would they combine them all into a single track? Or would we finally get 4? The answer was 3, which admittedly felt like a lame course to prioritize, but it's surprisingly fun in this game. It pops out a lot more than it did in past games, because even though the art style isn't anything particularly noteworthy, there are now audience members scattered throughout the track to make it feel more alive. Otherwise, nothing has really changed except for these new traffic cones. The main attraction is still the 180-degree turn halfway through, and it might be even more fun now than it was in the old days, thanks to Mario Kart 8's improved controls and purple sparks. There's not much else to say other than it's surprisingly good, despite being the weakest course in Wave 2. Sky High Sunday is next up on this list, the brand new track never seen before. Alright, so some of you guys may not like this placement, as from what I've seen, this was by far one of the most hyped up tracks in Wave 2. But remember what I just said, I enjoy all courses. Sky High Sunday is no doubt the craziest track of the 8 introduced in the second wave. It's the only one of the entire booster course pass so far to have incorporated anti-gravity, and it works well considering how tilted it is. But even crazier would be all the places you could trick off of, as not only are there a lot of them, but because it's got low gravity, it feels so much more epic than it would have otherwise. It gives you no time to breathe, as even the starting line immediately throws you at the glider ramp. So why isn't this track any higher? While excluding the fact that chaotic doesn't always translate to amazing, the track layout is kind of underwhelming in comparison to the atmosphere. I mean, it's literally just an oval. There's not a lot of turns or twists for you to drift around, which isn't a massive problem, but it does mean you'll mostly just be driving in straight lines. Ninja Hideaway from Wave 1, despite being from Mario Kart Tour originally, felt more like a base game Mario Kart 8 track than this did. That's not to say this is a bad course, because I certainly enjoy it, it's just that Wave 2 is so good that ultimately there had to be a track down here. I really wanted to rank this course higher on the list, but because of how far up the bar has been raised for this wave, GBA Snowland is only at number 6. I think that out of all the 8 courses that were announced for Wave 2, this was probably the one I was most excited for to try out. Mario Kart Super Circuit is one of the most underrated games of all time, and its track selection is one of the most unique in the series, only limited by the console. It wasn't until Mario Kart 8 that it got some justice with the remix of Cheeseland and Ribbon Road. However, one of the most underrated tracks from the game has always been Snowland. People rarely talked about it, and whenever it came up in conversations, the only thing people remarked on was the constant earthquake that went on for the entire race. And somehow, this forgotten course made it into Wave 2, a summer-themed one at that. My mind was blown. Like the other GBA tracks in this game, it's received a massive renovation. Instead of being a random ice track in the middle of nowhere, now we're racing around a park of some sort surrounding a frozen lake inhabited by penguins. The elevation is all over the place. You've got the edges, which are higher up, and then the basin consisting of the frozen lake, which even features a ramp to help you get up again. All of this while still being faithful to the original layout. Take note, Sky Garden. I really don't have anything to complain about in this course. I guess you could say it's a bit more safe than the other ones, but not every track needs to be super epic. Snowland is good as it is, it's just that Wave 2 is so good it had to be at 6th place on this list. And at 5th place, we have Wii Mushroom Gorge. This has always been a fan favorite among people. It was one of the best tracks in Mario Kart Wii and one of the best retro courses from Mario Kart 7. So no doubt, we all expected to see it make a grand return early on in this DLC. Visually, this might unfortunately be the weakest one of Wave 2, as the grass looks like clay and the color choices don't feel as natural. It's a victim of the Shroom Ridge treatment. However, like Shroom Ridge, the gameplay changes are perfect. See, each version of this track had one thing the other lacked. The Wii original had a shortcut near the start that was cut in 7's remake, but in its place was a blue glider mushroom in the cave area. Well, would you know what, this version finally brings the two together for the complete experience. So despite the graphical downgrade, it's definitely the best version of the three, but even other aspects of this track have been improved. Originally, red mushroom platforms made you bounce and trick, while green ones acted as platforms. But thanks to the generosity of Mario Kart 8's trick system, you can now trick off the green mushrooms as well. So yeah, Wii Mushroom Gorge, another track on this ranking that's only in the bottom half due to how great every single track has been. I'm serious. Moving on. Starting off the top half of this list, we have the absolute madness that is DS Waluigi Pinball. Good lord, did they turn an overhyped slide into one of the most high-tech tracks of all time. I never cared for this course on the DS, because while the concept was cool, the execution was mediocre because only a small fraction of it took place on the actual pinball machine. Now, while they didn't really change anything gameplay-wise, they absolutely nailed it aesthetically. My biggest gripe with this track originally was that it took place way too much on the pinball slide area thing, which could have been in literally any other track. It wasn't particularly distinct. But the lighting and color choices of this version has made the entire track feel like a pinball machine now, even the slide area. I should also mention the fact that despite the music being the same as in Wario Stadium, it somehow actually fits this track even better, even though it was made for another track. Or maybe it just gives off that illusion, because thankfully they kept a unique jingles for when you hit the item box. Either way, I was pleasantly surprised by this remake. It deserves every ounce of respect it gets. Like, this is easily S tier and we're not even in the top 3 yet. Starting off the top 3, we have the final non-tour course on the list, N64 Calamari Desert. I have to say that out of all the tracks in the booster course pass so far, the N64 ones have translated the best over to the Switch. It was the case with Chaco Mountain, and it's especially the case with Calamari Desert. They turned one of the most boring courses of all time into one of the most unique ones in the entire series. In Mario Kart 64, it was so barren. It was just a loop that went on for far too long and had far too little things going on. Sure, there was a train that crossed the road every now and then, but that's it. It only became fun when you didn't play it the intended way and drove on the rails. The 3DS remake was a bit better thanks to the many ramps added, but it was still pretty eh. But this version is absolutely kingly. Visually, it's already much more beautiful than some of the other ones in this DLC, with a sunset, but the gameplay is the real deal. The first lap is as it's always been, but then for the last 2 laps, you actually drive on the rails, with the third lap even starting here. Yes, something that was only an Easter egg in Mario Kart 64 is now the intended route. This was admittedly first experimented on in Mario Kart Tour, which added a second variant to the track, but the full potential was realized when they combined the two versions like a city track. It was such a genius idea, and I'm glad they realized the potential, as it's effectively become one of the best retro tracks ever. But speaking of city tracks, the top 2 courses of Wave 2 are the 2 city tracks introduced. For me, it's these types of courses that gives this DLC a reason to exist. As a geography and traveling fanatic, I love the idea of driving through real-life locations, and their potential has been fully realized in this game, as every lap has you taking through a different part of the city. It was really difficult to pick which one I liked better and worse, because they were both amazing and more ambitious than the ones in Wave 1. But at number 2 is gonna be New York Minute. for now. This course is nearly flawless. It was actually the first city track to ever come out in Mario Kart Tour, but I can understand why they waited until Wave 2 to release it, because it's absolutely crazy. In fact, maybe they even should have waited until Wave 3, because you know, Moon Cup. Unlike most of the other city tracks, this one is night themed, which already makes for a much more different atmosphere. And while I don't like the music on its own, it fits well with New York's chaos. Gameplay wise, like the other city tracks, it has you exploring a different part of the town for every lap, and this one in particular has a Tokyo Blur kind of approach. The first lap is New York minute 1, the second one is 2, and the third one is the final lap. Obviously. Alas, there's no New York minute 4 representation, but that should be obvious, I mean look at the map. This approach is simple, but it works really well. The first and second laps are pretty similar to each other, while the third lap has you exploring some kind of movie theater and underground parking lot, not seen in the previous 2 laps, which makes for a distinct final impression. It's absolutely amazing and it all flows so well. But with that being said, however, I do believe Sydney Sprint is more worthy of being number 1. I think both are almost equally great and my placement could change in the future, but as of now, it is what it is. If New York Minute was Tokyo Blur, then Sydney Sprint would be Paris Promenade, and by that I mean it's a lot more ambitious in its track layouts. Now yes, I'm just as surprised as you are that we saw this track so early. I mean, there's the Boomerang Cup already, and actually playing this track makes me think even more that it should have waited a couple of waves until it got here, since to be fair, it's a lot more climactic than some of the other city tracks. Aesthetically, I'm slightly more fond of New York's nighttime, but everything else about Sydney Sprint is just slightly better right now for me. The music is more epic for starters, but the gameplay is also more ambitious than New York Minute. The first lap is Sydney Sprint 1, nothing unusual. The second lap is not Sydney Sprint 2. It's actually a combination of that and possibly Sydney Sprint 3. Yeah, that's also the thing, Sydney Sprint 3 doesn't actually exist yet, so that made me even more surprised that they decided to bring it back so early. But yeah, it combines what might be that, and then halfway through you play Sydney Sprint 2. And the neat thing about it is that for the most part of it, you drive in the opposite direction of Sydney Sprint 1, so when the third lap comes around, you basically play the first lap but in reverse, just like in Paris Promenade. This is perfection, since you open up and end the track with the same epic glider ramp. Sydney Sprint is exactly what every city track should strive to be. It's got a super cozy atmosphere, each lap is different from the other, and the map layout is incredibly ambitious. It is the best track of Wave 2. And so, that was my ranking of Wave 2's courses. But what is your ranking? If you like this video, then make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel as I talk about everything Mario related. With that being said, I'm signing off.